All right, hey everybody, welcome to the Mudpie podcast. I'm Ryan, and this is my co-host. Oh wait, I said that backwards. I'm Jesse, and you're Ryan.
Wasn't gonna say anything. I was gonna.
I should have said something. That would have been awesome. And today we have Dr. Bruce Solheim with us. Bruce, why don't you just kind of tell everybody a little bit about you, just a brief bio, what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. I was born in Seattle, grew up there. I had Norwegian immigrant parents, so I was the first one in my family to go to college. I did 6 years in the U.S. Army, 3 as a jail guard and 3 as a helicopter pilot. I was at the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg. Never in combat, luckily. I figure I'm pretty lucky that way. I got my bachelor's degree in the Army. I got my master's when I worked at Boeing. And then I got my PhD in '93 in history. So I've done a little bit of everything. I've written a lot of books, mostly history books, but about 4 years ago, a dear friend of mine died and named Gene, and he was also Norwegian, of Norwegian descent. We grew up together. He died, and then he came to me in a dream, or in a vision, I would say, more than a dream, and spoke to me, and he told me that it was time for me to tell everybody about my paranormal experiences that I've had since I was 4 years old. And I was always been afraid to, except for a few chosen people, that I told, because I thought as an academic, as a professor, I've been teaching for, 30 years now. I thought that they would fire me if they found out that I talk to dead people and, see ghosts all the time and talk to aliens and have all these experiences. So I decided I wasn't going to say anything until he came to me and said it was time. And I asked him a few questions, and he said that we're all timeless, that when we pass from this world to the next world, that there's no past, there's no future. It's just all timeless, just one continuum. What did he call it? Like a present, that doesn't begin, it doesn't end. Mm-hmm. And so he gave me the name of the book, the title of the book that I would write, which started the trilogy of 3 timeless books: Timeless, Timeless Deja Vu, and Timeless Trinity. And it has 89 stories of different paranormal things that have happened to me. Everything from ghosts to talking to, mediumship to alien. I don't like to call it abduction, just contact. Mm-hmm. So all those things, everything in between, psychokinesis, telepathy, everything that goes with the high strangeness, Yeah. So wow, that's just a short version of all the stuff I've done.
You said you've been experiencing them since you were 4.
Yeah.
Can you remember your first experience?
Yeah, because it was a healing experience. It was I called it an angelic experience because my mom said it was my guardian angel. I was in northern Norway. We were visiting my grandmother, and this is a really remote place. It's an island about 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle, and there's no hospitals or anything. It's only 2 ways on the island: is by boat. At that time, by boat or by airplane or seaplane. And so there was no hospital to go to. I got really sick. I remember I was so sick that I had such a high fever. I couldn't move my head. I couldn't move my limbs very much. The neighbors who are our relatives came over and said they thought I was getting, had been struck by polio. So my mom was obviously very worried. I remember crying myself to sleep. I woke up in this little bed my grandmother had in the kitchen, and I saw this bright light above me in this old farmhouse, in the beams of the ceiling. Mm-hmm. And the bright light was warm. It made me feel safe. It made me feel okay. And I went back to sleep. And then when I woke up, I had no fever. I was able to move my limbs and my head. And my grandmother and my mom said it was my guardian angel. And I think that what that did, and my mom was very psychic, too. So, and her mother was very psychic. So I think it kind of follows the bloodlines there. But what that did is open the door for me for the rest of my life. To this day, I have had experiences. The only difference now is that from early on, when these things happened randomly and kind of frequently, but randomly, now I can kind of not control it, but I'd say I can manage it better than I could before. I know how to manage it. I'll just say that. I don't think you can ever control these things totally, but
Sure.
I can definitely do a better job of managing. So that's how it all started. I think that opened the door and made me realize that anything is possible with this stuff.
Now, was your family into any type of like high strangeness or stuff since you were a kid, especially coming from like a Norwegian background or culture, as far as ancient stories or anything like that? Was that impressed upon you at a young age?
My dad was very practical. He was a fisherman and a carpenter. If you ever seen the show The Deadliest Catch, he was an Alaska fisherman. He was a no nonsense kind of guy. My mom was an artist, so there were two very different people, and she was the psychic. And we used to read cards, like just the plain, playing cards, and we would read each other's minds. The telepathy, send and receive, and we'd get a pretty good hit rate going, several in a row. And then my dad would come over and he'd say, "Okay, put it away." He didn't like it. I think that was the only thing that frightened him, was the chance that this could be real. So it was fine as long as it was entertainment, but when it became clear that this was more than just guessing, he'd say, "Put it away." So my mom would put the cards away and she'd wink at me. So that's how I knew that that what we were doing was real. So she fostered it. She didn't train me. She wasn't like didn't do a psychic thing as a business or anything. She just was a very intuitive psychic person.
Sure. When a kid is creative, you want them to draw and paint and all that good stuff. So
she always encouraged the writing and the artistic side of me. So
how open were you? Were you like outspoken about this stuff when you were a young kid?
I think when I was a young kid, I would talk about it to everybody, to my friends and stuff, and But then I remember in school starting to talk about these two invisible playmates that I had, John and Johnny, and it's a whole other story. But anyway, I remember teachers saying, discouraging that. They said, "Okay, it's great to have imagination, but that's not real. We're in school now. You can't talk about stuff like that." So I think it kind of caused me to kind of put that aside. I never disbelieved it. I just didn't talk about it. I learned that you shouldn't talk about it. And so, but I always kept that going kind of privately. And then my mom kind of encouraged it here and there. So, so I didn't really speak publicly about it. To a few select friends every now and then, but every once in a while you get a bad reaction from them. So then you just kind of back off and go, "Okay, yeah, just kidding,"
Sure.
No big deal. I'm sure it was just the trick of the light or something, But depending on your reaction.
You said that they were random. Is there a point in which you felt like you could, like an experience that triggered something that made you feel like you could manage them better? Or was that just something that kind of like grew over time?
The ability to manage it grew over time. And I started studying parapsychology. Well, I took a class when I was stationed in Germany. When I was a jail guard in Germany, I took a parapsychology class, and just to get to the background of what this is. And it was a really cool class, but something always got in the way of me progressing, So, some personal crisis, or a job crisis, or, in the military is always something, So even if you're not in a war, there's always some kind of BS going on. So I never got to really fully explore it. And it really wasn't until my friend Gene died that I went full throttle into trying to manage it. So things kept happening until that time. And now I can manage it much better, because I know the way I describe it is like, if I want to experience something or communicate with spirits or do anything like that, all I got to do is get myself in the right mindset. I get into what's called, my friend Gene, who's kind of helped me from the other side. he calls it focused calm. You know, and I usually do it by taking a walk. I call them spirit walks. I do them several times a week. And I get into there, I do some protection prayers, and then I just, I think of it like a big radar dish that appears, you know, above my head. And at that point, I can take in whatever's there. Now, that being said, so people don't get the wrong idea, I have a lot of protection, you know, when I do it. Because I tried it at first, when I tried it, I didn't do any kind of protection. I just said, you know, come on, let's go. And all kinds of weird stuff was coming in, you know. So I said, no, that's not good. So, because there's some not good stuff out there too in the spirit world. And
have you had any really bad experiences?
Throughout my life, when I was not managing things well, when it was just happening, I would set myself up for some bad things. For instance, a couple of, for one thing, when I was in Germany, I was stationed in Mannheim working at the prison. My girlfriend also worked at the prison. She was on duty and I was off duty. So I was I went to the art center and I was I made like a demon head out of clay. And I didn't know why I made it. I just felt compelled to do it. It was stupid, I know. But I made it and it looked really cool. And the art teacher came over and said, hey, that's really great. I got a book in my office. He went and got this book of demonology. And he said, this is this or this or that demon, whatever it was. And the guy was so weird. I just said, okay, that's fine. I'll, see you later. And I took the demon head and I thought, I'm going to take it, put it in her room, let her roommate let me in and then set it up on her night table. And it had like this mirror behind it and scare her, when she came in. That was my idea. It was going to be funny, right? That was going to frighten her. So I set the thing up, put some candles there. Her roommate left. She came into the room. Well, before she came into the room, I was staring at the thing, and its lips started to move. Its lips started to move, and it started to make these growling sounds. So I thought, man, that is so strange. I mean, a lot of strange things that happened to me, but that was really strange because it was made out of clay, right? So she comes in, she sees it, and she goes, "Get that thing out of here." And she said, "You don't understand. When I was in high school, I made the same demon head." This was before I knew her, right? And she never told me the story. She said, "I made that same demon head, and the thing was possessed, and it was possessing me. So, here it is. It's coming back again through you, And she took it and she opened the window, and it's like a third story where her room was, and she threw it into this big dumpster down below. And so the lesson there was that when you have this ability to connect, you don't know what's coming in. And if you're not careful, you're going to manifest things that you don't want to have involved in your life. So it was a pretty frightening experience that I learned a lesson from it, not to fool around with stuff like that.
Sure.
And I know I watch these shows, like with my youngest son, we watch all the paranormal shows, and you see people go into these places and okay, there's some demon in here, and I'm thinking, I wouldn't go in there. I've dealt with this stuff. I don't want to bring it on to me. I mean, unless I have to deal with it, I'm not going to encourage it or put myself in harm's way. Yeah. And that was just one of the negative experiences. I've had a lot of positive experiences too, but that was one negative one. And it actually ties into military stuff too. So
that's fascinating. Now,
in the military.
As far as these experiences go, you said you had probably hundreds over the course of your life.
Yeah, I would say so.
And you were saying that kind of presents itself in different ways, whether it's like seeing dead people and things like that. What's the most common way that it presents itself to you?
Well, I would say the most common thing, because I manage it and I practice it, is mediumship. Being able to communicate with those that have passed on. And one of the early experiences I remember with that, and it was still random at that time, I went to my first open casket funeral, and it was an old family friend, an old Norwegian guy who was a friend of the family who had died. I think he came over on the same boat as my parents in 1948. And anyway, he had died, and I was sitting next to my mom, and then my dad was on the other side of her, and we were just sitting there, and I saw him. It was weird. I'd never been to an open casket funeral. There was this guy who I saw alive, and now he's dead in this casket. So I was kind of freaked out by that. But then I heard his voice, and he said, "Don't worry, I'm okay. Don't be afraid. I'm okay." And he talked just the way he did in life with this really heavy Norwegian accent. So I knew it was him. It was his voice. So I looked over to my mom, and she looked at me, and she just smiled. So I think she heard it too, but we couldn't talk about it because my dad was right there, and he didn't want to deal with any of that stuff. So I remember that very, very clearly. And, Mom didn't really like to talk about it, but I knew that she knew that I was experiencing this too, and that she was hearing it too. So now when I do these spirit walks, I've learned this method that I was telling you about in order to reach people who have passed on, including my friend Gene, who I talk to quite often. Mm-hmm. And I'll have friends, like, I don't do it for a living, I don't charge people, but I'll have friends that will lose a loved one, and they'll say, "Can you get a hold of Uncle George or whatever?" And I'll go, "Yeah, I'll try. If he wants to talk, I will," because not all of them want to communicate. So, yeah. And I will usually be able to connect with them. And usually what they want is proof of life after life. So I will ask them questions like, "Can you tell me something very unique that I would never, there's no way I would ever guess or know?" And they'll tell me stuff. And then I'll tell the person, they'll go, "How'd you know that?" And I said, "Well, they told me." And so then people get freaked out, but they usually thank me, and that's all. I just want to help people have some closure so they know they're okay, that there's really nothing to be afraid of, like Gene said, when you passed on, not that you should squander the life that we have right now or do too much risky stuff. But once you passed on, everything, it's okay. He told me it's okay. So it kind of took away, because I can communicate with those that have passed on, it kind of takes away some of the fear of death. I'm not going to say it takes away the whole thing, because you always feel like, well, I don't want to suffer, I don't want to
fear of dying,
prolonged death or whatever. Death. Yeah, but once you're gone, it's okay. You're in a good place. So according to my friend Gene and others. Yeah. But so that's the most common thing. Intuition is something that everybody has. I always like to point out, I teach a paranormal class at school, which is a whole other story. But anyway, in addition to my regular history classes I teach. And the one thing I tell the students is that how many people have not had a paranormal experience? And a couple people raise their hands because they just don't know, right? So I'll say, okay, have you ever felt like somebody's staring at you, and then you turn around and somebody is staring at you? And they go, "Yeah, everybody's had that, right?" I said, "Well, how does that work? If you don't have eyes in the back of your head, how do you know someone's staring at you?" Because that's paranormal. That is a sixth sense. That's something that we all have. That goes back to the old caveman days,
So your view of paranormal is something that is natural, inherently natural. We just might not be able to perceive it.
Exactly, natural and normal. And you guys been in the military, right? Ryan, you've been in the military too?
No, I'm not military.
Okay, but I know Jesse, you have. Mm-hmm. So when you're in a dangerous situation, a lot of times you use whatever senses you have. It's not just your eyes, your nose, and your ears. You use your sixth sense too. And when I worked in the prisons, I had to use that all the time, because there's dangerous situations around every corner. You just don't know when someone's going to do something. And so it's a natural thing. So that's why I always say the paranormal is really normal and the supernatural is really natural. We're just taught by polite society that it's not,
Yeah. So what's your view? Like, what do you think the afterlife is, or what do you think this medium is that people are able to communicate with you? Like, do you not give into any type of reincarnation or anything like that?
I think that does happen. I think reincarnation does happen. I think I kind of subscribe to the many worlds theory, that there's a lot of things going on simultaneously. Like there's different versions of us and different branches of reality. And I call them, what do I call them? Forks in the road of time, where you have this event happen where you could have died, but instead you live on in one fork, but in another one you passed away. So in that reality, in that world, you're no longer in that world, but you are in this other one. It just happens instantly. And I had an experience like that when I was driving in my truck with my son. We were going to work out, and it was just a moment. I was going here in Southern California. I was going through an intersection, going about 45, and something fell, and I reached down to look, just to look. And it was that split second, the light went red. These two cars came, from either side, and going about the same speed as me. And I looked up just in time to see him coming right at me. We would have been double T-boned, by these oncoming cars. But for some reason, everything slowed down, like the Matrix or something. And I was able to maneuver, somehow make the right acceleration or deceleration and turn and get through there. And by the time it was all in slow motion, like I had all the time in the world to make this maneuver, I got to the other side and everything went back to normal speed. It was like I caught a glimpse of what could have been, in one branch of reality, we might have been in a horrible car wreck and people killed or, horribly injured. But in ours, we somehow survived.
Yeah.
And I caught a glimpse of that. And it made me realize, and Gina's told me this too, that there are many different realities. So I think the theory that I've come up with, and I'm sure you guys have heard of this before, that the spirit world where ghosts are, the alien world where non-human intelligences are, and the quantum world are really all the same thing. I think that's the secret. It's all the same thing. And we know, I'm not a scientist, I'm a historian, but I study quantum physics. And what I understand is at the quantum level, the subatomic level, there is no time. There's no timeline. There can be bilocation. You can go forwards and backwards. And, it's this whole bizarre world, that we don't see every day. But I think that's where spirits can work. I think that's where alien entities work. And I think some of these paranormal things, you slip into that just momentarily enough to experience it. And I think that's where high strangeness comes from.
Kind of like a dimensional thing, like all these things are present at the same time. It's just they're in different dimensions of the existence. Or
like an in my comic book, I call it an interdimensional vortex.
Yeah.
That they use for time travel and travel through space and stuff. But I think that's probably not far off for what it should be called.
Yeah. So do you think what happens to that person's consciousness? So you're able to answer questions, or sometimes they can give you information based on their lives after they've passed. And that would mean that consciousness that lived that life is the one that you're communicating with. What happens to that individual's consciousness beyond that? Are they stuck there? Is that something that do you think just like dissipates or maybe merges with something else at a different point in existence?
I think we all have a little piece of a larger consciousness, this one great consciousness, people call it God or whatever, and I think we all have a little piece of it. And when you shift into this other reality, I think that the whole backstory changes. I think you can, so you don't think like, well, sometimes you catch glimpses of that backstory, and that's where I think people think of past lives, because they go, wait a second, I was in World War II, I was a foot soldier in World War II, and or I was on the Titanic or whatever, people catch glimpses of this stuff because they have, their little slice of that great consciousness is then they have now taken over that and have gone into this other reality.
Yeah.
To tell you the truth, I don't know exactly how it works, and I've tried to have the people I communicate with on the other side to try to explain it. But just when I think I kind of get an idea, I remember one time I went outside. I like to look at the stars every night. So I go outside and I was looking at the sky, saying, I think I understand. I think I get it. I felt like I understood something. And this voice comes to me and says, you don't even know what you're thinking, what you're saying. You got this little tiny little dust speck of information, and there's much, much more. So, don't get too excited about what you think you know. So it's kind of it's a humbling experience. Yeah, I mean, that's true. I think you're right. A researcher told me once, he said, we're all as psychic as we need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I at first, when he said that, I thought that's kind of interesting. So you can become more psychic, and I think you can. But at a certain point, yeah, you need to be able to handle it.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting parallel to people that have mental illnesses, especially schizophrenics. I asked a psychiatrist once, I said, is it possible that people who are schizophrenic, people that, hear voices all the time, could they be very psychic and they just don't know it? They just don't, they just have got lost in that world and they just don't know how to get back. Could that be part of it? And he said, you know what, I've thought about that before. And this is like a practicing psychiatrist said that. Yeah. And he said, and he got very sad when he said that, because, oh my gosh, these people, we're medicating them, we're trying to get, but they're really just very attuned to be able to glimpse other dimensions.
Yeah.
And we say they're crazy, but how do we know what they're seeing might be ghosts or aliens or who knows, whatever. I mean, here I am talking about it. Somebody could come up and say, well, what you're talking about, that's the very definition of schizophrenia, and put the white, the straitjacket on me and take me away, and I'd lose my job and everything else. That's part of the reason I was so reluctant to talk about it before. And I've actually been on interviews where, call in kind of shows, and people have called in and said, is it possible that you're just nuts, that you don't really hear anything, you don't see anything? And I said, well, I mean, if I am, I'm very high functioning.
Yeah.
But I don't think I am, because I've had confirmation that I've shared with people about, these contacts.
Sure.
And so we're just scratching the surface. That's what's so exciting. I'm glad you're doing this show. And I know there's a lot of shows out there, but everybody gets a piece of the puzzle. And if we all talk to each other and put it together, maybe we can figure something out.
And that's what's been cool about all the, how podcasting just kind of sprung up. It's just a great way. And it seems like people are becoming more and more open to conversations like this and being like, oh, there could be something weird. I mean, we find it perfectly acceptable to believe in any religion across the world and think like that's fine with all the miraculous and almost paranormal and supernatural stories that are found there. So I don't see why it's any reason why this can't also be a thing,
Sure. I mean, what is praying but a meditation of reaching out to a higher being? I mean, that is, people accept, that's perfectly acceptable. But then you talk, well, I talk to dead people. Well, that's different. That's demonic or that's evil.
It's just because their one belief system told them that a certain thing was wrong, or don't access us this way. You can only access us this by doing this thing.
It could also be like a power grab. They don't want you to know your innate abilities. And I'm not downplaying religion. I think religion has a very important function in society for helping people. But there's also a matter of control. If people realize they have unlimited potential to do these incredible things, then how what's going to happen? That the horse is out of the barn then.
You wouldn't need all these people to take care of you. You know what I'm saying? You could do all this stuff yourself.
Yeah.
I am curious, what was your experience, if you don't mind talking about it, the experience that you had with your best friend, the one that got you like really seriously into all this?
Yeah. So it was some people would call it a lucid dream. I call it a vision, because I feel like I was awake. I was more awake than asleep. And I actually saw him come to me. And this was about a month after he passed away, my friend Gene. And, I was very upset about him. He died of cancer. He was only like 59 years old. He was just a year older than me at the time. And he was just, it's always these really great people that seem to pass away young. It's like he was a very giving person. He was an actor. He was a very caring person, and he was just a wonderful person. And he had been ever since I was a kid. And he came to me, and I could see him like I can see you guys. And I was, surprised, even though I've had weird things happen to me. I was surprised, and I said, "Hey, Gene, I said what most people would probably say if they encountered a person they know had died. I said, what's it like to be dead? That's a natural question, right?"
Sure.
And he said, he laughed, and he said, "I don't feel like I'm dead." And he said, besides, if I was really dead, would I be talking to you? And I said, well, that's a good point. And then he laughed again. He still had a sense of humor, which was cool, And then I said, well, what am I supposed to do? Why are you here? Why are we talking? And that's when he said, it's time for you to tell your stories. It's time. Don't be afraid. Nothing bad will happen. And I was afraid that I'd lose my job, or people would think I was nuts, that my wife would leave me, whatever. And he said, don't worry about it. He said that everything will be fine. And he was right. I published the first book, and nobody tried to, fire me. My friends, instead of running away from me, said, that's pretty cool. Let me tell you about this ghost experience I had. So I was like, all of a sudden, a safe harbor for them to pull into and talk about their paranormal stuff. And so I published the second book. And when I did that, I decided, with Gene's encouragement, I decided I was going to teach a paranormal class. So I thought, okay, they didn't fire me for admitting I talked to dead people and stuff with the first book. So maybe I'll do even more stuff with the second book and ask them if I can teach a class. So no one was more surprised than me when they allowed me to do it. And it's a community college, Citrus College. And I've talked to people around the country, and there are very few colleges that teach that have paranormal classes that are, accredited colleges. So, and all these people, like 35 people, were there for the first class. All ages, young people, older people, all ethnicities and religions, whatever ethnicities and races. And they all had one thing in common, and that's what they wanted: a safe forum to talk about their experiences. Wow. They wanted a safe place. And they wanted to understand, to have a framework for understanding what is going on. So that was my job, was to provide that safe environment and give them some kind of a framework, which I was trying to figure out myself at the same time. There's no better way to learn than to try to teach. Right. That's what I've always said.
That's so true. Now, how is your class structured? What do you guys do? What's the focus of this class?
Yeah, we do 7 sessions. Of course, now it's going to be online in the spring because we're all online now. So it's not going to be as cool, but I bring in guest speakers. So I'll bring in, for instance, this one lady's going to come in. She does hypnotic regressions, past life regressions. She's a psychic. She also does telekinetic spoon bending, like Uri Geller, but she does it for real. I've seen her, in video anyway, do this. So she's going to do that for us. I've brought in magicians, people who do stage magic, and they talked about how some magicians use, not just sleight of hand, but use other sources, and some of them even use some kind of the dark arts to do what they do. And so that was fascinating. I brought in Dean Radin, who's the chief scientist at IONS, Institute of Noetic Sciences. So he's a full-time researcher, scientist, who deals with the paranormal and and testing and proving this stuff in a laboratory. So I brought him in to do a lecture. I brought in a Peruvian shaman, to do the traditional stuff. I just bring people in. We have discussions. It's really cool.
You're making me want to take this class, Bruce.
It is a cool class. It really is. And now that it's online, it could be anybody. You can take it from anywhere that you are. And I've added some of my historical stuff, like how did spiritualism start in America? It really started in America in the 1820s, with the Fox sisters, and then it kind of built from there, and all the personalities that have emerged here in America and overseas, and then combined with the traditional paranormal stuff, ancient stuff, and to get to where we are today. And I think we really are in a transformational age where people are looking for answers to things, other than through the traditional, people don't have a lot of faith in government. A lot of people lost faith in organized religion. So they're looking for a more natural explanation for things. And so I think it's a good idea to expand your consciousness, and that's what people are doing. That's the appeal. And I love teaching the class, and I learn from all the students who take it. They bring something in and tell me stuff that a lot of times I have never heard of before. And they're very serious. They're not, at first I thought, well, who's going to show up? A bunch of people in witches costumes and, a guy with a pitchfork. And, I didn't know what was going to happen. But they were just normal people, regular people just like us, and young and old, men and women. Yeah. And they were just wanted a place to figure it out, a safe place. Because a lot of them told me they couldn't even talk to their husbands or wives or boyfriends or their families.
Oh, wow.
Because they didn't accept it. So they had to be hidden in their experiences, which is not good for a person.
What percentage of students do you think haven't had experiences and just come to the class to hear experiences?
I think there are some that are skeptics. I had a fellow professor, a friend of mine who's a professor, a math professor, and he's very much a scientific, whatever you call it, a materialist. He doesn't believe in any of this stuff, right? So he was a skeptic, and I invite skeptics to come because I like them to be there, because what happens is inevitably they realize, oh my gosh, I've had paranormal things happen to me. And by the end of the class, I'm not going to say he's like a convert or something or whatever, but he was talking about animal spirits, how his cat who had died still visits him in his house.
Yeah.
And this was a guy who at the beginning said it's a bunch of BS, and
much more agnostic to it now.
Yeah. And the problem is there are charlatans, I call them charlatans out there, who are saying they're psychics and are really just taking people's money, and people who are writing books who, they're just faking everything. And there are people like that. And there's just enough of them where it convinces people who are kind of on the fence. Oh, well, I don't want to be tricked, and, and then there's professional debunkers who do that for a living to prove that there is no such thing, as ghosts and stuff. And so it's like a 3-ring circus out there in the paranormal, which you guys probably already know, but you really have to pick and choose. You have to pick. Yeah, so you have to, it's like, what's the old Latin saying, caveat emptor, buyer beware, because it's a minefield out there.
Yeah.
You got to be careful as you make your way through.
Now, if you said you brought in a shaman, have you ever used or tried psychedelics to take you to a different dimensional place in reality?
I haven't done that intentionally. Now she uses what do you call it, ayahuasca or whatever that stuff is. Yeah, ayahuasca, and she's used peyote and stuff. But I've never done that unintentionally. When I was younger, somebody gave me angel dust.
Jesus Christ.
So that was the worst experience I've ever had. And I thought it was, he had like a little hash pipe. He said, here, you want some? And I had smoked pot before. So I thought, okay, hash is just a, concentrated.
How old were you here?
Sure.
I was in my 20s, in my early 20s. So he said, here, take this. And okay. And then I looked at it and I go, what's this white stuff in there? It's not supposed to have white streaks in it. And he said, oh yeah, that's PCP. And I said, PCP. And he said, angel dust. And I go, that's bad stuff, isn't it? He said, oh yeah, it'll give you a good high. And I said, well, why didn't you tell me that before? But it was too late, because I was already, I at one point I had, it was me, and then there was this other version of me, like a balloon over my head. So I was like looking at the physical part of me, and we were traveling together as I walked through this was at a farm. So it was really a kind of a scary place anyway. So I was walking around with this ethereal version of me together. And somehow I felt I had to get to bed and sleep it off, to get it out of my system. So I had to walk through the farmhouse. So my in-laws were watching Wheel of Fortune, which is like the worst show probably ever if you're having a bad trip, right?
Yeah. So,
the wheel spinning, people are screaming, all these bright colors and lights. So I had to somehow walk through the living room to get to the basement stairs and I think it took me like 20 minutes to get across that living room. And because I had no sense of time at all, you know, plus I had this balloon version of me, you know, that I was trying to manage, you know, somehow. Or it was trying to manage me, whatever it was. And I got downstairs and I went to lie down and I was like above the bed floating. And yeah, it was a horrible experience. So
would you ever try, like, I guess my ultimate question is, do you think that experience is also in the realm of paranormal? Do you think, because I kind of think we have the ability to utilize these plants and these drugs or whatever, but mostly like plant-based things for historically since the beginning of mankind. Like, is that just our gateway to it?
I think it's an accelerant. That's what it is. I don't need it now because I know what I can do and what I want to do. You know, I don't need to go too far. I can go far enough and I can manage it. But I don't blame people who do that. You know, I understand it's an accelerant. It's a way you can get there. You don't need it though. That's the ultimate thing, is you don't really need it. You can do it yourself with meditation and focused calm, you know, like my friend Gene says, but, and then opening yourself. And the interesting thing is, the more experiences you have, the more you believe it's possible. And the more you believe it's possible, the more experiences happen. You like go through doorways, you know, and hallucinogenics and stuff can accelerate your journey through those doorways, you know, the doorways of perception, but you don't necessarily need them. And you do have to be careful, you know, if you're not familiar, you know, if you're doing that kind of stuff, you do have to be very careful. And I don't encourage it, obviously, but that was my experience. So I had already had, you know, pretty trippy experiences before I had that PCP experience. And I wouldn't recommend PCP to anybody. It's
pretty intense.
And you can't feel anything either. It's like and that's why cops are really worried about, you know, when they arrest people or they have to take somebody down, if they're on PCP, that's like the worst, because they can't feel any pain and they're just completely, you know, out of it. And so you can understand why the cops don't like to deal with those, you know, people that are on angel dust. But no, I think you're right. But I would call it like an accelerant, you know, that gets you there quicker to that altered state where you can experience all this stuff. You can see other dimensions. You can enter that quantum realm, you know.
I'd be pretty interested to see kind of what's going to happen, especially where you're at, where they decriminalize or they're starting to use, you know, psilocybin mushrooms to treat things like PTSD, or using it as like psychiatric treatment. Like maybe in the next like 10 or 15 years, are we going to start seeing a population of more and more open or aware people, or a greater shift in people kind of leaning towards thinking about these ideas more because of the access to this stuff now?
I think it is, you know, the VA has been kind of reluctant to use anything, although it has been shown that certain of these, you know, more natural things can really help a person manage their PTSD. You can never take away the trauma, but you can get to a point where you can manage it somehow and come to peace with it and realize this is part of who I am, but I'm also this other part, and then move together. And, you know, I mean, I myself had PTSD, not from combat, but from working in the prisons. I worked in a military prison. I worked in a maximum security prison. And it was a horrible experience for a young person. And I was lucky I was never in combat, because if I would have seen some of the stuff that I know a lot of guys have seen, men and women, I don't know what would happen to me, but it was bad enough being in the prison and seeing the things I saw. And, you know, man's inhumanity to man, you know, I mean, it's pretty nasty what people are capable of, both the good and the bad. You know, the good, like I always say about the military, I met the most incredibly good people that I've ever met in my life in the military, and I've met the most despicable people that I've ever met in the same organization.
Yeah, that's the truth.
But you know, what you're saying about this is that I really think that there is and what I've been told through my spirit guides is that there is a leap of consciousness that is happening. Not a leap of faith, but a leap of consciousness. Not that it's mutually exclusive, but that we are going to be given an opportunity to take that next step in our evolutionary process. And I think that's important for people to realize that we're going to need to do that.
Yeah. I'm really interested in these spirit guides that you've mentioned a couple times.
Yeah.
For a couple of reasons. One, I'm curious as to what that experience is like and what you mean, like maybe defining spirit guides. And also just your background, your like cultural and familial history. It seems like a lot of people from cultures like Norwegian cultures or maybe ancient South American cultures, things like that, use this term spirit guide or are more deeply involved with spirit guides than maybe people from different like ancient backgrounds, for instance, like European backgrounds, which I don't think necessarily have like a big culture in like spirit guides or things like that.
Yeah, well, the people of northern Norway, I mean, that's the land of trolls, right? There's people that believe in trolls there, especially Christmas time. You got to leave the porridge out in the barn, otherwise they're going to mess with your animals and stuff. So, I mean, it's just part of the culture there. So it's kind of acceptable. I had an experience where my grandmother, who had passed away, I was in her house. We were visiting in 1972. She had just died. My parents were next door with my cousins. I was in the house by myself, this old farmhouse, the same one where I had that experience when I was 4 years old. And I felt a hand on my shoulder and I smelled my grandmother. And I know it was my grandmother because the house still smelled like her. You know how a grandmother's house smells. It just, the person that had died just 6 months before. A hand on my shoulder, I turned around, there's nobody there, but I knew it was my grandmother. So I ran out of the house next door to my cousin's house where my parents were. They were all drinking coffee, And I said, hey, I just, grandmother came to me, she was in the living room and she put her hand on my shoulder. And my parents and my cousin just looked at me. And then my cousin said, he was an older guy. He said, oh yeah, there's a lot of, spirits around here. It's no big deal. Yeah, we see these all the time. So they just accept it as part of their, and then they moved on to talk about something else. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, they dropped everything and ran over there or something. It's just, oh yeah,
it's just a normal thing.
It's a normal thing. And spirit guides, I have two that I use for protection. I call them Theodora and Ozzy. Now, Theodora is kind of an angelic type entity. I don't think she ever was human. I think she's an angelic entity. She's been with me since birth. I think she was there when I was 4 years old. I think it's the same entity. I call her Theodora. And Ozzy doesn't say anything. He's kind of like, the way I describe him, he kind of looks like an Indian chief, very stoic, and just classic kind of Indian, older Indian elder look. And he's like the gatekeeper, the bouncer. He doesn't let any bad entities in. When I do my spirit walks, I always appeal to them. I ask them to help me and protect me. And Theodora, makes the connection and Ozzy protects me. He never says anything. He's just like, this guy at the door. He's not going to let any bad stuff in. So I always thank them and appeal to them at the beginning when I do these spirit walks. Now, as far as who I talk to, I can talk to anybody. They could be relatives or friends or maybe a friend's relative who passed away or, somebody that I'm trying to contact. Or it's my mom and dad, my sister who passed away, my friend Jean. I have a couple other friends. And I also have some very interesting entities that the best way I can describe the main one is a guy named Anzar. And Anzar, Anzar, he is an ancient alien mystic. So he is non-terrestrial, right?
Yeah.
And so I talk to him quite often. And I know it sounds weird and trippy, but he helps me a lot. He helps me an awful lot. That was the voice I heard when I looked at the stars and said, I think I figured it out. He was the one who knocked me down to size and said, you don't know anything yet. Mm-hmm. So he's kind of like a mentor in this thing. And it was him and Jean who said one of the most interesting things that I still think about every day. I asked them, who are these alien entities that people are seeing, that people are having experiences with? Who's in these UFOs? And I said, who are these aliens? And Gene and Anzar both said and agreed with each other. They said, we are the aliens. And I said, and I remember asking Gene, I said, now, when you say we are the aliens, you mean like you guys in the spirit world, you know, where you are and we're not? And he said, no, we all are. We're all connected. And then Anzar said, we are all connected. In other words, they are our ancestors, they are our future, they are our past. We are all connected. We're all the same. Now, we might look different, but you know, these are our relatives actually that are visiting us.
And do you think they're visiting us from like literal places outside of the solar system, or do you think they're living, like some theories are that they are from this planet, just in a different like dimension of
yes reality. And a different time and place. There's different. I have a friend of mine who teaches at Montana Tech, where I dropped out of engineering school, and he has a book called Identified Flying Objects. Mm-hmm. Not unidentified, but identified flying objects. And his theory is that these are people that are time traveling, humans that are time traveling, coming back to try to help us. I think that explains part of it, but I think there are others who are the origins of who we are. You know, they came here and planted the seeds. That's what Anzar has said. You know, he called himself the progenitor, which means the originator of, you know, the life, right?
Yeah.
So that's what he called himself before he named himself Anzar. So I think that's a combination, and I think they're here for different reasons. I think they operate in the same realm as ghosts, because when you hear about people who've had alien abduction experiences, they always say, okay, they came in, they just like vibrated into my reality, and then they vibrated me out, and I passed through a wall, I passed through a ceiling, through a window. Well, when you think about it, people who've seen ghosts, which I've had, they just, you know, appear out of nowhere, and then they disappear. Mm-hmm. Because they're operating in the same realm, this quantum realm, mm-hmm. that we can't, like you and I right now, can't necessarily see it, but it is operating all around us. And if we were to see the quantum realm, we'd be freaking out right now. You see all the subatomic particles and everything, and then time would not exist the way we see it. So we have this comfortable reality, or semi-comfortable reality, that we've created to keep our minds, you know, to keep from freaking out, you know, because if you have too much, you might not be able to handle it. At least you can only handle it in little bits. Sure. And so I think that's, you know, that's what's going on, that we are the aliens. I think it's a very simple phrase, but it means a lot. It really means the most important thing is that we're all connected. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, you know, you've read about the military disclosing the UFOs, although they call them UAPs, right? Mm-hmm. Unidentified aerial phenomena, because they don't want to say UFO because that sounds like a bunch of nut jobs talking about, you know, stuff at a convention. So that's why they changed it, but it's the same thing, right? And you know, I think our government, our military is very confused about this. And I've talked to people who are in the government in different, you know, agencies, and they don't know what these things are. They don't. It frightens them, because the first thing they think of is maybe a hostile force here on Earth has somehow been in alliance with them, and somehow they're spying on us. And I'm thinking, if they have this incredible technology that we've all seen now, we've seen video of it through gun sites and stuff like that. If they wanted to do us harm, they could have easily done it already. You know, so I don't think that's the problem. And I don't think it's under the control of some other hostile power. I think this is above and beyond that. And what I've been told is that none of that technology can be used to harm anything. So if we're thinking, well, if we can just get that Tic Tac thing and strap a bomb on that thing, man, we could just do whatever. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They're not going to allow that. That's not what it's for. We have to be evolved enough to handle it. And that's that leap of consciousness that we need to make.
Now, when we're talking about these, like this military relationship with the UFO stuff, mm-hmm. disclosure seems to be a word that they're throwing around a lot, or at least they seem to be talking more and more about it. What's the issue right now with why they haven't put all of their knowledge out there? Because it seems to me like it would be a lot better if we could get everybody's scientific eyes on it, like all professionals throughout the country, the world, to get all the information the military or the government has on these objects, and then try to work together to figure out what's going on with it. I mean, because I don't know if you believe in the stuff that like Bob Lazar talks about, where, you know, the military actually has hands-on like some craft and things and are trying to backwards engineer them. Like, why are we keeping it such like so restricted, like the knowledge so restricted from people?
I think, or like Philip Corso's book, After Roswell or whatever.
Yeah.
I think it's all compelling evidence, but it kind of misses the point. I mean, it's fascinating stuff, and I don't discount any of it. You know, I think there are bits and pieces of it that probably are true, but it misses the point. The point is that we need to make this leap of consciousness in order to survive. And that's why they're here. That's why they're helping us. They're trying to help us. And they, you know, there are different alien types that have different agendas, but ultimately most of what they're trying to do is try to get us to make that leap of consciousness so we can evolve. And, you know, I think Lazar, you know, there are people who think he's a fraud. I don't think he's a fraud. I don't think Philip Corso was a fraud. You know, I have belief in these people. There are other people that I think are phonies, you know, that are out there that are quite popular, but I don't have that feeling with them. But the point is that it's as much of a spiritual thing as it is a nuts and bolts thing. And I think the alien entities, I think the non-human intelligences will show us what we need to see in order to take that step. If you need to see nuts and bolts, they'll show you nuts and bolts. If you just need to have a feeling of connectedness with the universe and maybe a glimpse of the other world and see loved ones who passed away, or, you know, ghostly images or whatever, they'll show you that. I think they can show you whatever you need to see in order to take that step so that you believe and then have more experience based on that belief.
Yeah.
That's what Gene says. He says that experiencing is believing and believing is experiencing. So I think you have to look at it, you know, kind of in a whole, holistically, you know, rather than we have this aircraft we recovered, or the spacecraft or whatever, and maybe they are reverse engineering it, but even if they do, they're not going to be able to know what to do with it because we're not allowed to do anything bad with it. So even if a hostile power, let's say communist China, has their hands on these things, they're not going to be able to use it against us or against anybody else. That's not what it's for.
Yeah.
And if I was an advanced civilization coming, I wouldn't want to give them the tools of their own destruction. I would want to help them, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
And I think most of us would want to do that. And obviously, if they can reach out from in time or through space or space time or whatever, you know, they're not a bunch of dummies, you know.
Right.
Now, back to these spirit guides. Does everybody have spirit? Like, how does the spirit guide thing work? Does everybody have them? Does one spirit guide cover multiple people, or is it a skill that you have to like seek out to be able to have like a relationship with these other existence?
I think everybody has them. And if they really think about it, if they go back in their childhood, and some people need to be regressed hypnotically to connect, because we've built these barriers, right?
Man, I want to do that. I want to try that one day.
It's really cool. Yvonne Smith, I've done regressions with her. She's great. She's here in Southern California. But anyway, I think everybody has them. And if you've had a invisible playmate as a kid, which I think everybody has, that's a common experience. That is part of it. That is part of it. That gives you a clue as to who was there with you, who has been with you the whole time. Now, I happen to have two that I work with. I think other people might have just one. Maybe some have more than that. I think everybody's a little different based on what they need. So I have one that's a protector and one that opens things, you know, and heals. So I have, both of them, and they've been with me since I was born, as far as I know. And I think if people are open to it, then they can access them. If they're not open to it, then they're not ready, and people can't force them to do it. But if they're ready and they say, I'm ready, then you are on a path to understand who they are and what they're doing for you and what they can do for you. And the main thing they do for you is open up, they open the aperture so that you see what else there is other than, the everyday stuff that we do. And they also protect you.
Now, how does one go about, like, let's say someone's interested in becoming an experiencer or having experiences like this, and they have never had one before. How does the person start getting involved in that? Or if I'm like, oh man, I want to have a experience like other people that have had UFO or UAP or alien experiences, quote unquote alien experiences, like, how do I get that experience, or how does someone start to get towards that?
I would say they have to proceed cautiously and start with a person you can trust who's had these experiences. Someone, not like one of these sensationalist types, but somebody through somebody else that you can trust, and just start. They might give you a book to read. They might just sit and talk to you or call you up on the phone if you're distant, whatever, and start with that. And that'll plant the seeds to get you to the next step. And one of the things that they should tell somebody is that you need to have protection. You can't just, like I say, open up the radar dish and just say, okay, let's go. That's you're setting yourself for all kinds of problems. And I've made that mistake before. I didn't have adequate protection.
Is that from bad energy, bad entities? Is there some kind of like negative force or group of things?
Yeah, well, and it's based on our human weaknesses. I'll give you. I don't know how much time we got, but I got a quick story.
As much time as you need.
A quick story. After I was on a big show, I don't know if you want me to mention it, but anyway, it's at night, right? It's the biggest show, I guess, in the U.S. And I was being interviewed, and a lot of people contacted me after this show, and some of them were kind of a little bit off, and other people were pretty cool. And but one of them was a film producer, and he said, I think you're the real deal. I think I want to film you, and I have this documentary idea, this show in mind, and I want to send you out to Chicago and film you, and doing picking up on doing your mediumship and psychic, testing your psychic abilities. And I said, sure, yeah, I'll do it, because I was thinking, man, all right, this is great. I'll get on this TV show, and it appealed to this side of me that I don't like, which is, fame and fortune, right? Which is so silly. But anyway, I fell for it. I said, okay, that sounds cool. And I said, well, my wife has to come with too. I don't want to go by myself. And he goes, okay, I'll pay for your wife. We'll put you up in a hotel. So they sent us to Chicago, and this was in January of 2019. I got there, and he had this whole thing set up. We were going to go to these different sites. And he wasn't going to tell me what happened there, but something very dramatic had happened at each one of these sites in and around Chicago, north, Chicago and in other towns and around there. And I had no idea where it was. Well, I had a couple of the experiences were pretty cool. They were mild experiences. Like he took me to some old country road with it looked like a haunted house, and there's a graveyard there. And I heard when I was in the graveyard, I heard one of the spirits that was at the graveyard reply to me, because I was complaining about how cold it was. I mean, it was January in Chicago.
Yeah.
And it was like 5 below zero. You guys are used to that kind of weather. Yep. But, Southern California, we're not, right? So I was complaining. I said, man, this is really, really cold. I had no idea it was going to be this cold. And one of the spirits said to me, you think that's cold, you should try being dead. And it was a joke, and I thought, that's funny. That's really funny. The dead person is communicating with, they know I can hear them. So you think that's cold, you should try being dead. So, and that was a mild experience, but then he took me someplace that was in the south side of Chicago. And as soon as I got out of it, we parked in an Aldi's parking lot. I got out, And immediately I started to have images of like from the 1800s, the late 1800s, like there's these horses and buggies and people in dark clothing, you know, a lot of movement going back and forth, but all of them were ignoring me. They just like I wasn't there. I just saw it like a movie in front of me. And then there was this one guy standing there staring at me, and he had on a bowler hat. He had this curly Q mustache, you know, and he had these really dark eyes and a dark overcoat, and he was just staring at me. He was very scary. So I got the creeps, you know, from this guy. So the TV producer had to fiddle around with his camera, so he mic'd me up. He got the mic on, and I was explaining all this stuff, right, what I was seeing. And then I decided that kind of image went away, and then I decided to walk. And there was this alleyway, and between the Aldi's parking lot and the other side of the street, which was an old post office, right? So I was walking in this alleyway. I went up to this tree because I often feel like if you touch something that's been there for a long time, it retains some kind of memory or energy. So I went up to this tree, and I was about to touch it when all of a sudden I was like driven into the ground, into the snow. I mean, just face down, you know, injuring my knee and my foot, like I'd been tackled by an NFL linebacker, you know, just getting on top of me and driving me into the ground. And I couldn't get up. And it was horrible. And I'm a big guy. I'm like 6'3", 275. It takes a lot to bring me down, but I went down hard and I felt like I couldn't get up. And the worst part was that I started to see images under the ground of like people being tortured, men, women, and children. They were being dismembered. They were being asphyxiated. They were being, you know, horrible things were happening to them. And they were crying out in agony and pain. And I started to feel like I was losing my will to live. You know, it's like I should be able to get up, but why can't I get up? It was like there was nobody there, but I felt like something was holding me down. Well, finally, and I was telling the guy on my mic what was going on, and he's busy trying to get his camera together. And so finally I made it up, you know, and then I got out of there, and I told him, I said, let's get out of here. This is horrible. I said, I can't be here anymore. And he said, you know, I'm starting to feel funny too. He said he started to feel tingly all over his body. So we got into the car, and I told him, I said, don't ever take me to a place like that again. You know, because what happened is I wanted to impress the guy, right? So I had my radar dish go up, and I didn't do my normal protection. So I got physically injured, psychically and physically injured. I mean, seriously injured. I was, for about a year, I had my toe was dislocated. I had something wrong with the, whatever you call it, meniscus, you know, in my knee. And so that took a year to get through that. But I got in the car and we drove away, and he said, I asked him, I said, what is this place? You can tell me now. And he said, well, this is the site of the murder hotel. Dr. H.H. Holmes murdered maybe up to 300 people right here. The building doesn't exist anymore, but it was in that location. And it was built in about 1890 in time for the Chicago World's Fair. And he tortured and dismembered people there, maybe up to 300 people. He was the first American serial killer. Oh, and that's who I saw. That was the dude with the mustache. And then I looked him up online, and that was the dude. I can't even look at that picture now. It's just too freaky. And that was the guy. So it was either the spirit, the demon that possessed him, or it was his evil spirit that still haunts that area.
That's crazy. So
that's what happens when you don't have protection. If you're a sensitive person, it can happen.
Is it being driven by an ultimate, like, I guess, is there sides? Is there like a good and a bad side? Is there a ringleader for negative entities, or is it just in general, things that exist can be not necessarily good, and that can like grow exponentially based on choices that existence makes?
Yeah, I think there are negative energies or entities, which this obviously was, that probably drove him to the madness that he had, and helped him, do that stuff. And that does exist. And I asked my friend Gene, I said, what happens to the really evil people that die? Are they there with you? And he laughed because he had a good sense of humor. And he said, well, let's just put it this way. They're in a different zip code. That's what he told me. I don't know what that means. I guess a different area. And I guess they got to work their way back to be regular. They might get another chance or something, come back as a snail, who knows what.
So does that mean that there's some kind of like life review of some sort?
There must be, they're not like, he didn't say they were like in the pits of hell being roasted, he said they're in a different zip code and they're not with him, which I said, well, thank God they're not with him because he's such a nice guy, and so I think that might be what's going on. I don't know if it was the demonic force of H.H. Holmes that inhabited his soul or whatever, or if it was partly him, but it was definitely, because I saw the image of him and that happened to me. I know that it was something very dark and it feeds on misery. So that's another thing the producer said. He said, look around as we were driving away. He said, look around, look at the people. And I looked at the people and it's a poor, south side of Chicago. Mm-hmm. Everybody looked miserable. I mean, they were just miserable. And those kind of entities love that. I think they love that negative misery. They just revel in it. Like we like to be around people who are happy and give us joy. Those kind of entities like to bring you down, and they that's what they live off of. I think that's the energy they live off of. And that it becomes kind of a storehouse or like a battery, collecting that negative energy there.
Now you study history. Do you think that this connection to this other dimension or other reality has been helping societies evolve throughout all of history? Like, I don't know what you study, like what your specialty is in history, but like seeing this relationship way, way long ago.
I think it can help people if they can put it into the right perspective. The problem is that people get misdirected. Mm-hmm. They find out that they have certain abilities, because basically all it is, and if anybody's looking for the magic formula, it's really just, and Dr. Dean Radin says this too, who's done all these laboratory experiments. All it takes is attention and intention. It's really that simple. Attention to something like that focus, right? Mm-hmm. And then intention. What do you want to happen? And if you can focus that like a laser beam, you can make stuff happen. Now, the problem is that if you do something negative, yes, you could probably make something negative happen, but as we all know, that stuff comes around again. Mm-hmm. So if you just, if you use that, it's kind of like Star Wars, and maybe oversimple, the dark side and the Jedi versus the Sith or whatever. Mm-hmm. And, this idea that we have this ability to do this stuff, but you have to be very careful. As Dean Radin said, I've told you the simple answer, but you've been warned. That's what he says in his book, Real Magic. It's a really cool book written by a scientist. It's really just attention and intention. So really, you don't need the robes, you don't need the candles, you don't need the magic rituals. Those are all accelerants. Those are all things that can get you there. But really, it comes down to attention and intention, whether you're doing remote viewing or talking to the dead or whatever. That's how you get into that other realm, what I call the quantum world, which everything is operating in.
Yeah. Now, besides Dean Radin and people that you've mentioned already, is there anybody that you think would be a good resource for people to go to if they want to start down a journey like this? Any particular books that you recommend?
Yeah, I would start with Real Magic by Dean Radin, because he's a legitimate scientist. He was on the Operation Stargate, which you're probably familiar with, which was the psychic spy network that we had, which the government claims we don't have it anymore, but we all know they still do. Yep. Why wouldn't you use it? It works, right? So It's an asset. Any book by Lynn Buchanan, who was an actual psychic spy. He's a remote viewer. He's an excellent human being. He lives in New Mexico, in Alamogordo, I think, New Mexico. So Lynn Buchanan is really good. He has a remote viewing class that he offers online, if you're really interested in that. Remote viewing is where you use your psychic abilities to see through space and time. So like, you know, if we were doing remote viewing session now, I don't know what's in your studio there, but if we were doing this, if we did an experiment, well, it would be single blind. If it was double blind, you wouldn't know what the target is either. But let's say it's double blind. You don't know what the target is, but it's somewhere there in Missoula. And there's somebody standing on some corner. And I would say, okay, I think the target is standing on the corner of Montana Avenue and something, whatever. And so you can check these things. And these expert remote viewers like Lynn Buchanan and what's his name, Joe McMoneagle, who's probably the most gifted of all the military spies, psychic spies, they can do that. They can see through time and space. And of course, you can see the advantage of that in the spy world. You know, you can look inside secret bases, even inside of secret rooms, and see documents and stuff like that. Well, as soon as the Russians found out we were doing it, of course, they started doing it, and we all still do it. Yep. It's just we don't admit it. I think it's probably too weird for John Q. Citizen to put their mind around that, realizing that that's part of the how we know what's going on.
And that the government takes it really seriously. I have a lot of friends that like lose their mind when I tell them you can just go read CIA documents that talk about remote viewing experiences where they had people look at places on Mars from like 1.5 million years ago. So clearly we're taking it like seriously.
Yes. Yeah. And it's all pieces of the puzzle. And of course, most in the defense industry, you know, what they're interested in is trying to figure out how to weaponize it, you know.
Yeah, of course.
And that's where we go wrong. And that's actually where Lynn Buchanan checked out of the whole program, because he was being used. And he talks about a terrible incident where a young girl died, and as a result of his remote viewing session. And that's when he decided he wasn't going to do that anymore. And now what he does is he uses his abilities to find lost children. That's what he does now.
Oh, that's awesome.
So he's really turned it towards that. He didn't want to be used to harm people. Use his abilities to harm people. So, and so really it comes down to attention and intention. It's really that simple. But actually, because it's that simple, it's that complicated too. Because you know, not everybody has natural abilities. They can cultivate them, but you're only going to become as psychic as you need to be. And I like to use the analogy of baseball. Some people, everybody can probably throw a ball, right? Some people can throw it 90 miles an hour. Those are the ones that get recruited, you know, to do this kind of stuff, and that are very good psychics and remote viewers and stuff.
Man, that's so cool. Well, thanks for being on. Do you have any, do you mind telling anybody like the links, places they can find you, any upcoming speaking engagements?
Yeah, what about your books?
Like that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, cool. BruceOlavSolheim.com. So just my first name, Bruce, middle name, Olav, which is OLAV, Solheim, SOLHEIM.com, BruceOlavSolheim.com. There you'll find my Timeless trilogy of books, my comic books, which I just kind of mentioned a little bit, my Snark comic books, which feature an alien hybrid character. They're kind of fun. They're humorous, historical, science fiction kind of stuff, all ages kind of comic books, because I love comic book art. And that's where you can find out what I'm up to, the books I've written, the history books, the plays I've written, you know, stuff like that. So that's probably the best place to go. Or you can just go to, you know, Amazon and look up Solheim, Bruce Solheim, and you can see the books there. So.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate you coming on. This has been awesome.
Yeah, Bruce, thanks for sharing your stories.
I appreciate it. And you guys stay warm there in the state of Montana. That's the coldest winter I ever spent. That winter I was in Butte.
Butte is especially cold. It has a special kind of coldness to it.
That's where I learned you have to have a block heater for a car, because I didn't have one. And I think I ruined my car because of that.
Yeah. I think a lot of people probably do. Well, have a great day, everybody. Thanks for joining us. See you later.